when we're losing trust in the currencies that are backed by nothing, by the politicians that are backing it, right? So think about Canada for a second. We have no gold. All we have is a lot of promises by these politicians that they're going to pay us back, but how are they going to pay us back? Our pension plans don't have any. Well, they're sitting on US dollars that are quickly losing trust among the world because the system is based on trust. That's it. Trust on what? The political party? Well, you have two now back in the US dollar. You had the Democrats and the Republicans. What are the choices, right? I don't know. I might like one versus the other, but it doesn't really matter. No, that's why gold always comes to the fore.
Welcome to the Competent Man podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Jaime Carrasco. Jaime is a leading Canadian investment professional with 25 years of experience providing wealth management and investment counsel to affluent families, businesses, and institutions. I hope you enjoy the discussion, and don't forget to let me know in the comments on X or Instagram if you have any suggestions for future episodes or feedback for me. Let's get to it. Okay, Jaime Carrasco, welcome to the Competent Man. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for having the honor of this interview. I love the concept.
I'm very honored to have you as one of my first guests, and I think really to kind of set the tone for what my goal is to kind of capture with this podcast is to start by asking you what success looks like to you. How do you define success?
That's a good question. It's funny because to me, success, it's family, friends, the way I see the world, my clients, the people around me. And to some extent, it's a challenging time that we're going through. So the definition of success, I think, to some extent, is still to be defined because I find that I've been preparing people and myself for a period of time that is now here in front of us. Something that I kind of saw coming a long time ago, but it was very hard to define for people, but I knew that we needed to prepare. And now we're here. So I think success will really be defined once we're through it to see if my efforts were worth it. If I can carry my clients through the next period of the next couple of years in how I think we position ourselves, that'll be very successful. Success as well, I think, has also be measured. Funny, I was at a funeral last year for Don McLean, a client and friend that I respected quite a bit, much older than me. And the amount of people that showed up to his funeral and the comments were great. That's really when success is really measured after we pass, and how many people we touched, how many people we motivated and helped along the way. And so that's why the what is success to me? Is it the material? Not necessarily. One of the things that I was taught early on in this business, not to measure success by the amount of money, just look at the financial reward just as a scorecard. It's more the challenge of the work, right? I've also measured success in terms of the people I met along the way and what I saw, the flaws I saw in people, and it made me realize what I didn't want to be and what I wanted to be, right?
So maybe reframing the question with a bit of a story is a more interesting way to go about this. So for myself, I have always had very, very diverse interests, very diverse skill sets. So last year, I spent my winter racing motorcycles in the southern US. And as part of, let's say, being able to have that goal, I needed to be able to make my RV able to basically sustain itself off grid, while still being able to do my work, to have internet access so that I can, sustain this lifestyle. So I spent a couple weeks of my time learning how to build my own solar setup on my RV so that I can be completely off grid without having to run the generator and stuff like that. Long story short, I was at a conference with a friend and he asked me, why did you spend your time building a solar setup for this RV? Don't you think your time would have been better served by paying somebody to do that task for you, and instead you spending the time to make more money? And I stopped and thought about it for a little bit, and this kind of fed this idea of what I define as success for myself, and that's being able to spend my time or having the luxury to decide how to spend my time for the most part, which is I decided that building this skill and learning this system of wiring and how to put together this system so that if it breaks, I know how to fix it as well. That's success to me, is like being able to spend my time doing what I want. So,
right.
So to reframe the question, how do you see a successful way of spending your time while you're here? Because I don't necessarily want to be able to look back on my life, as you said, only retrospectively after you die and being able to measure it at that point.
It's funny because you're talking about a skill set when you describe it that way. Let me relate it a little bit different. I knew what I didn't want to become through the people I met in the yacht business. Mm-hmm. I've always approached my life more with the attitude of I just want to have fun and see where. I've always said life is a river. Most people tend to swim against the current. I've tended to swim with the current and see where it takes me. Mm-hmm. Along the way, I got very lucky to. The number one lesson my grandfather taught me, my mother's father, he was an industrialist in Chile. Last time I saw him, he wasn't very huggy, not like my father's father. And the last time I saw him was at the airport in Pudahuel, and he said to me, "Don't forget where you come from and act like you belong." And I've always had that attitude, and that, not really knowing, but as I came to Canada, brand new experience, not knowing anybody as an immigrant. In university, I ended up talking myself into testing sailboats for a yacht company. Mm-hmm. Turned out to be Canada's first or second biggest yacht manufacturer, was CS and CS Yachts. And through the people I met through that period of life, I realized what I didn't want to be. Mm-hmm. I met two kinds of people. The people that bought this very expensive toy because it was a toy and it was a status symbol to them. And then the guys that bought the boat because they loved the craft, the machine. Mm-hmm. Putting a boat together would take about 2 to 3 days, tune the rig, make sure the motor works, everything works. And then you hand it over to the client. So you got to know people. Then I also ended up racing and hanging around the yacht clubs. And the one thing I realized about the two attitudes of the two people, now keep in mind that at the time, I had no idea what I wanted to be in life. Well, I had a BA. I ended up doing a 3-year BA over 8 years doing this. As I met people, I realized two things. What was motivating them? The guys that were motivated to own the craft because they enjoyed the sailing, they also love what they did. They were wealthy, but they also appreciated and loved their careers and the path they were following. Mm-hmm. The other people that bought the machine for the status symbol, to me, they were idiots because they were doing everything for the money. Mm-hmm. And you met their family lives and the people, and they weren't good people.
If I could interrupt for a sec, are they doing it for the money or for the ego stroking exercise?
Both, mm-hmm. right? It was a complement of both, mm-hmm. right? And that's where I realized by getting to know people that whatever I end up doing, I might as well enjoy what I'm doing. And it was thanks to the sailing that I ended up on Bay Street. Mm-hmm. Chap called Nelson Liang bought a CS-36, which was a big boat, had never sailed, 36 foot, and he wanted to race it, but had never sailed. Ended up being his captain. The name of the boat was Perpetual Floater because he was the chief equity strategist for Central Guarantee, and he had made enough money to buy the boat on a perpetual floating preferred trade, and that's the name, perpetual floater. We became friends. He loved the business. And talking to him, I realized, this looks very interesting, because I've always liked history. I've always liked, especially the history of money. So talking to him about money and all that, I realized, that Bay Street sounds like fun. But it was through those experiences that led me to work in money. But why wasn't for the money. It was because, and he was the one that said to me along the way was, don't look at money as just look at it as a scorecard of your success, but enjoy, but especially when working on Bay Street. That's when I realized, I'd rather do something that I enjoy what I'm doing. And I love, as challenging as it has been over the last while, I love the career I chose. I love the people that I work with, helping people. And I think that's my definition of success is enjoy the trip, enjoy the journey along the way. And then at the end, when you look back, hopefully, you've gathered enough good memories and helped along as many people as you can, that you can look back and feel good about the work you did.
You mentioned this idea of swimming with the current. And also in your explanation, you're talking about people that did it for the love of doing it versus doing it for, let's say, the ego stroking or for the money exercise. So what do you think, what role does being intrinsically motivated by a task or a hobby play, how has that played in your life? And has that always been, let's say, a driving factor in what you've felt passionate in and been successful in?
It's extremely important because it's driven by curiosity. What you were saying about fixing up your trailer to be solar, I think that's an amazing thing, but I want to know how it functions. I want to get in there. I want to mess with things. I love sailing because, I could be in the middle of a storm and something breaks. I'll know how to fix it. It's the ability to fix it, but that comes from curiosity. I think curiosity is very important for the individual, for growth, in terms of finding out the whys. Somebody that there's so many people that can't figure out how a screwdriver works, right? Because everything's easy. But historical growth through civilization has always been led by people with curiosity, with the magic question of why, right? And I think that drives civilization in terms of trying to find out, Elon Musk, his journey, I find him the modern Howard Hughes, both driven in the same way by trying to figure out the why of things, right? And that fascinates me. And I think that to some extent that drives civilization and our movement forward. Yeah.
In one respect, you just mentioned that a lot of humanity's growth has been through curiosity. But what if we separate that question into pressure, growth through pressure? There's that saying that the mother of invention is necessity.
Yeah.
So in times of war, in times of poverty, in times of famine, do you think that ends up being a stronger motivator than just simply curiosity?
Well, I think those tough times call the herd, right? And the ones that drive ahead, become the leaders in those periods, are the curious ones, are the ones that have the ability to influence, right? Be it because they're the strong man or the advisor to the strong man. Machiavelli was always a fascinating character because of that. He was a brain. He could analyze the setup of things when he advised the Medici, but he wasn't necessarily powerful, but he was influential, right? So I think that it's not about strength. It's also about having the ability to see the puzzle at the time you're living in, right? Because again, the cycles of history that always repeat, I think you find common characteristics about the characters that drive through those periods that come ahead, right? And those are the characters that have always interested me, right? The wise, Nikola Tesla, to me, was a fascinating character, including, Da Vinci, right? The people that come out of nowhere and drive change or innovation. But again, curiosity, I think, is at the core of that. And necessity, of course. Social necessity always drives a lot because it also drives change. It's a process of pruning, which is always needed, right? Who was it? I love that last movie with Peter Sellers, Being There, when he's talking about the pruning, right? Now, he's a fascinating character. He's just a gardener, Chauncey Gardner. And all of a sudden, he's advising somebody who's advising the U.S. president. But through the simplicity of gardening, right? But again, he knew his gardening. And it's funny, through history, those how did Moses Zeimer call them? He had that show of individuals that he was the term doesn't come to me, but those people that tend to stand out every decade that influence, right? Influence change. Yeah.
So when you think about, let's say, those characteristics that you just mentioned about people that have driven history forward, curiosity being one of them, what other characteristics do you think suit that, let's say, that subset of people that drive history forward or drive innovation forward?
A definite belief in themselves. That, I don't care what others are thinking. This, I think, is the right thing to do, and to stick to that trajectory, even though somebody might think, why is a wheel going to be important? Like, oh, that shape you're making, that doesn't make sense, right? So I think it's the belief in the belief in yourself ahead of the collective to understand, hey, this might work, to try, right? And even if it doesn't work, it's the innovation. How many times did Edison try the light bulb until it finally gave way and it happened, right? So it's that ability to, I think that's the number one driver is the ability to, as crazy as people might think, that they don't see it, to be able to stand there and continue on your path, even though others don't see it. Like, I love the history of Cortez. It's funny because when we have the story that Neil Young paints of a killer, but he was really a political animal. He unites. The chickenpox hasn't yet affected the tribes the way it did by the time the Incas are there. And he conquers the Mayans through political dialogue with the other tribes that didn't like the Mayans, that they were fighting with. He unites them. So it's an amazing story because 150 guys, and he never said, even though they kept saying to him that, oh, he might be a god. He himself never introduced himself as a god, because he didn't think, he thought that, hey, that would be sacrilegious to say that. He would always say, no, I represent the King of Spain in his dealings, in his and thanks to the translator that he meets along the way, he puts it all together, right? So it's also communication, be able to use the circumstances of what's handed to you to put the puzzle together to achieve a goal. And that's the motivation of being able to present your arguments to people that are going to believe you and follow you along the way, right? But you're the one you're the catalyst of change that's leading that change, but it's 100% set on the belief that this is the way I have to proceed. Even burning your ship so that those within your party that are saying, you know what, this is crazy, we're never going to conquer 3 million people. Well, no, we're staying here. We're doing it, right? So, yeah.
I think another theme that, you certainly represent to me, and I think is really important through history, is this idea of actually taking action. And maybe capitalizing on change, being willing to make tough decisions and actually act upon them, being a man of action, maybe is a better way of saying it. So you grew up in Chile. You not only moved countries, but moved continents. You've made some dramatic, big changes through your career from moving from place to place. So how important do you think it is to be able to make a big decision like that? And how do you go about, let's say, weighing those pros and cons to be able to make that change in your life?
Well, I think that's a good question, especially with the changes that I'm going on right now, because the main motivator for the change that I'm going through right now is because I need to implement the policy that I think has to be implemented in terms of being able to sell my story and communicate not just to clients, but to other Canadians and other people around the world how I see these changes coming, right? I feel honored that even Eric Sprott, at Christmas, I ran into him and he said, "Oh, I haven't seen you do any interviews." And I said, "Yeah, I'm having issue with that." And he goes, "Well, make sure you deal with that because you're one of the few left out there." Right? So the recognition of somebody that I've always looked up to, realizing that was listening to my message and saying, it's an important message, right? I thought was great. Now, the reason why I'm taking action is because my ability to continue on my path has been hampered in that river that I'm swimming. Well, the easiest solution is just to move out of that current and continue in another. There's always solutions to every path, and it's up to the individual to find the solution on the way forward. Many people never seek to find an answer to how do I proceed ahead. Right? I love the story of the greatest Canadian. Died on the hill. He had cancer, lost a leg. The marathon. Terry Fox. Right? The challenge to rise to the occasion with everything that life had thrown at him is amazing, right? That's inspiring. But the majority of people that he would have said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," are like, "Oh, there's no way you're going to do that." Well, look at what he achieved, right? So, and I think that's important to be able to take action. It's the scary part, but I'm in a field where it is about action, about preparation, about taking advantage of the opportunity, and to some extent is the communication of to the people around me of that change and how I'm dealing with it. That's the important part. But to do it gets easier the older you get because then experience helps you along, right? I personally think that the time is good for me now because the catalysts are here, right? We've been talking how many years now that when I first started saying to you, "Hey, there's a monetary shift coming. History is telling us that this is here." Well, it is here. Right, it's funny now. It's undeniable. So to me, it's like, okay, the wave that I've been waiting for. That's why I love the surfing analogy. The Maverick is here. It's ready to ride it, and I'm set with my boards ready to go. Right. So anybody that's gonna stand on that wave, first of all, the wave's gonna overwhelm them. But I'm planning to ride it with my clients and myself and take full benefit of what's ahead. Because the other thing is, even from everything positive, from everything negative, there's always some positive. Because what history teaches us is that everything is shift. There's always a rebalancing of everything. So I'd rather be where the balance is, which is funny because I was Monty Gordon of Gordon Capital. We became friends along the way. He was a client until he passed. But early on in my career, he said to me, "Look," and this applies to life as well. He said, "Money is a blob on a platter. That blob will grow and shrink, but it's always moving. Make sure you get to where the blob is going. That's the trick." But that's the case with everything, right? Change. I love the change that I see happening. We're witnessing the decentralization of everything. It's funny. 1994, I began working at Burns Fry. They were moving over to Group RRSP. And with my partner at the time, David Knight, we thought we should start going after high-tech companies. We landed Microsoft Canada. And in my business review with my manager, he's looking at, oh yeah, I'm going to go after Microsoft. And I was like, who's that? Right? Nobody knew who Microsoft was going to be, but I understood the technological changes that were coming. And I thought, okay, this is going to be consequential. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, we were lucky, but we were there, right? We chose the right company and began riding this technological wave. But think where that has led us, right? In terms of how the world has become smaller, the changes that have transpired, right? To some extent, I've ridden those changes, and I'm extremely optimistic as to where it's going. I think the biggest change that's afoot now, though, is the monetary change, right? That's where, I would quote Nixon, how we temporarily left the gold standard. Well, that temporary time in the history of civilization is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. And 50 years or 50 plus years, it is a temporary blip when you look at history, right? So within our lifetime, it's one generation, but within the scope of history, if you look back, looking at history, it's just a blip, and I think that's amazing. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to life, taking the big perspective of things really helps, because patterns repeat and opportunities arise. But there's always a transition, and it's in the transition that one gets ahead.
Well, as you're explaining that, you said that you got lucky with Microsoft, let's say, but you couldn't have been able to be lucky had you not been prepared to be able to make that call, or been in that place waiting for the blob to flow towards you, right? So obviously luck does play some role, but being able to take action and be prepared, I think, is also at very least equally as important.
Of course. And picking up the phone to make the call and say, hey, I'm calling to make the introduction and make the effort. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the catalyst.
And do the research probably
and
too,
well,
right?
yeah, the research was there. We knew that tech would be important, that there was a shift starting, right? The computers had begun to change. And I've always been curious about, my father was an electrical engineer, so technology has always been a forethought in my view of the world, watching things change. It's funny. I actually was up for the lunar landing because my grandfather happened to be one of the few people in Santiago that had a TV in 1969, right? So I watched it. So technology has always been part of my life. But yeah, I guess you're right. There is a concept. A little bit of luck, mm-hmm. But then again, curiosity to be able to see how technology was beginning to change, how the computer was beginning to give us. I remember the Sinclair 2000, I think it was called, for $99, which was on the 1K that you could program. So it was doing some basic programming, and I thought it was cool, right? But again, that was in high school. I would hang out with, as much as I was hanging out with everybody, I love hanging out with the techies, mm-hmm. right? Even though I didn't know what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an architect because of Howard Rourke and the Fountainhead, mm-hmm. right?
Another one of Ayn Rand's books.
Correct. My favorite book, actually. Mm-hmm. That to some extent is important when analyzing character and the individual. He's been, in the back of my head. I actually gave both of my boys a first edition of the Fountainhead when they both turned 21, because I think it's an important book for people. But again, books have also been important. My father was a big reader, and he always was giving me books to read. Mm-hmm. And that really helps to see back in history and what has transformed other people to base your life in or on, sorry. Yeah.
So other than the Fountainhead, what are some of the other, let's say, 3 other influential books that you've either gifted people or have greatly affected your life?
Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to the Alliance Française de Saint-Exupéry, that's why in Chile. And the Little Prince, the ability to understand what is, when the rich guy's saying, oh, that's consequential, And the Little Prince is like, no, my flower's consequential because I love it. Love, right? The love of a child. The Little Prince, The Fountainhead. What other book that would be up there? There's so many. But if I had to choose one more, 3 books for my library that I needed to carry through. It's funny because it's 13 books, actually. And it's Uptown Sinclair's The Lenny Budd series, which is historical fiction. The story of Lenny Budd as an American socialite starting in 1917, right after the First World War. And it's his life right up to the setting of the Berlin Wall. So it's historical fiction through that whole period of time. And the parallels of that, the 17s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, right into that period to today. It's an amazing series. But if it had to be one book, and it's funny because it would have to be Pablo Neruda's Canto General because of Chile. Mm-hmm. It's he won the Nobel Prize for it. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of literature in Latin America, and I have a first edition of the. He was in exile, and the first 50 prints were done illegally in Mexico. And my father happened to have one, and I inherited from him. So that would be it.
Wow,
Canto General. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So of course, Jaime, you're a real student of history that informs a lot of how you see the world, and obviously as you've said, this really, it gives us an idea of the rhyming nature, let's say, of how the world unfolds. You also grew up under a regime with, more than one monetary reset. And so how do you think this parallels and informs your view of where we are monetarily in 2025? Like what? Because
we are on an amazing period of wealth building because of the wealth transition that's about to take place. Mm-hmm. As we once again transfer from a credit cycle, from a reality based on credit, on fluff, to a reality that has to be completely rebuilt. So if you said to me, where would you want to go back in time if you could go back in time and live from that point on, mm-hmm. knowing what you know now? 1776, 1933 were exactly those periods. 1776 would be even more important to me. Why? Because, first of all, that was the last time we messed around with a credit-based system, fiat system. And that credit-based system messed up the world so much that we had to completely rebuild it. And we rebuilt it in a way that functioned for 200 years. Because out of that mess, the republics are born. Mm-hmm. The most beautiful social contract ever written is the U.S. Constitution. Because while these 13 guys that wrote it might be white and maybe slaveholders, because that was the reality at the time, they set up a document that allowed them to share power among themselves while mistrusting themselves, mm-hmm. and created a social document that will, in my opinion, transcend even today. Because that gives birth, that moment in time gives birth to the republics, not just in the U.S., in all of the Americas as well, in some of the African, some of the other colonies also. But the catalyst for that is the fact that the kingdoms are broke. So we have to rebuild the world. I think we're exactly at the same process today, but we're going to rebuild it even better because the internet also means that everything's decentralized. Back then, so think about the banking system at that point in time. The banking system only got stronger because you still needed a centralized banking system in that new reality. And that banking system was based on printing presses. 1776, the French are printing money. At least their ability to print money was was limited by the amount of the printing press printing. Funny, because the second things the French do was to cut off the king's head, and then they go and burn the printing presses in Paris. Because they're broke, we needed to rebuild everything. And that's when the colonists say, well, you know what? Why don't we just do it ourselves? And how do we set up these republics so that we have a brand new construct? What is interesting is that Simón Bolívar from Colombia, O'Higgins from Chile, San Martin from Argentina, Washington from the US, all knew each other. They lived together in London at the time. So this is all being discussed among themselves. But as we rebuild the republic, then we had to build a centralized system of government, a centralized banking system. Today, think about Canada. The reason why we have politicians in Ottawa is because the country was so big that we needed to send them there to represent us. Do we need that today when we have the internet? It's immediate. It's because of blockchain, we can actually guarantee that my vote is happening live, right? So the whole construct is up for complete renewal. And I think the ability to decentralize is important. It's very important. Mm-hmm. First of all, first time I read the white paper for blockchain, I immediately realized that I love this because this is a decentralized ledger. What is a bank? A bank is a centralized ledger that guarantees that your money is your money, so I can pay my Ontario Hydro bill. But now I have an electronic system that guarantees it. So why do I need a bank? Mm-hmm. That's why as soon as I read it, I realized, this should do to the banking system what email did to the post office, right? So I think that as we go through this period of unwinding, of transformation, one of the things that amazes me is also how we can rebuild in a decentralized manner. And I see that already happening. Those tools are coming together already. And so at the same token, though, the wealth transfer that is to occur from credit assets back to hard assets is the opportunity for the individual. Mm-hmm. Because that's really where we can have the opportunity of, once again, making multi-generational money. I mentioned Don McLean earlier, right? He's a connection to the past that is there. So, true story. He became my client because his daughter, Lisa, were swim parents. She was part coach, but also became friends with my wife. And one day she says, talking to her husband, who also is in the tech mining business, she goes, you should talk to my dad. He loves gold. I said, great. Not knowing who he was. Mm-hmm. That's great. Set up a lunch, right? So first thing he says to me is, I love gold, but I hate the gold companies because I work with them. I said, great. I said, that's awesome, but here's why I like them, and this is my strategy. I said to him, if we go back in time, back to 1933, on May 5th, 1933, Roosevelt resets the monetary system. That meant that if you had $7,000 at the beginning of 1929 in the stock market, in gold, and in Alaska junior homestake mining, that 7,000 in the Dow by the setup of Bretton Woods was worth about $3,000. 7,000 in gold itself was worth $35,000. But the 7,000 in homestake mining in Alaska Juneau turns into $70,000, and it paid 10 to 15% dividend from about 1935 right through to Bretton Woods after the Second World War. And he screams out, my father waited quarterly for that check. I'm like, ooh, connection to history. Mm-hmm. Said, why? And then he tells me, I was 9 years old. My father was the mine manager for Canada's biggest gold mine in Northern Ontario, somebody with a job at the time. And he actually owned homestake mining. And every quarter, the check kept coming. And I asked him, so did he buy it before or after the reset? He knew exactly what I meant, May 5th, 1933. And he said he always wished he had bought it before. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, I don't know when the reset is coming, but I know it's coming and I'm preparing now. Mm-hmm. He said, when do I sign up? Right? So that's exactly, he understood the transfer of wealth that I was talking about. This time's even better.
He understood the monetary reset.
The monetary reset, correct. Because he had benefited from him. It had fed his family through the Depression, not just the work, but they were able to save in it and benefit from the cash flow that it was generating and and some of the capital appreciation, not the true capital appreciation his father had started earlier, right? And that's exactly what I'm doing, because that repeatable event is going to happen again, right? It's exactly what happened in Latin America. But there it happened between the peso and the dollar. The problem is now is the dollar and all the other currencies are, because they're based in credit, it's all devaluing. And so we're going to see this history has taught us that we're going to see this wealth transfer happen again. Now, this time it's going to be even more exponential. I don't think we're going from 7 to 70. I think we're going from 7 to somewhere between 70 and 700. Why? Because there's so much more debt. So when you understand history and you start to see the peso, that's why Dalio says you don't own gold if you don't unless you understand history and economics.
Right.
Right.
So you've explained how blockchain and or Bitcoin is key to the future. Why do you see the useless rock, as Warren Buffett calls it, of gold being a key to making this transition through this monetary reset as well, keeping in mind that not all of this audience knows about our previous conversation?
Because of the constancy that gold, Bitcoin will one day be gone, but that gold will still be there. Nature has given us 7 elements that will never rust. Think about the Romans. The Romans are all long gone. We still have some of their buildings still left up, but they're eroding. Gold never erodes. Gold has a consistency of time. I had a Giancarlo Lozech. He was a geologist, came to work here in Canada at U of T, and he became a client along the way. And as I was getting to know him, he told me that they were from Milan, sorry, and 500 years of money. And he said, our wealth has transferred through my family through art, real estate, and gold. Now, gold, because it has that sustainability that it never rusts. Once you have it, and you have you've spent the energy to get it out of the ground, you have it forever, right? So it's the energy and that consistency of being understood by humans, and I think I think also I would say aliens, because I don't know, you remember the Voyager spacecraft that we sent years ago with a record to tell people that we're here?
Right.
Well, the record was made of gold, right? Because it'll always be there. It'll never rust. And it's that consistency that gives it that tradition, as some people would say, for human civilization. The technology is how we exchange it. The blockchain is the modern printing press. It's just the method by which we exchange it. And without energy, it doesn't function. Right? So if ever we're back at the Stone Ages without energy, well, guess what? My rock of gold will still be there.
So realistically, in some ways, gold is a store of energy value that transcends whatever other medium is based off of that value, right?
Correct.
Like you can trade that for pesos to dollars, back to Bitcoin, and out to dollars or whatever our future currency is going to be.
I fully understand the connection between the two, and I believe in both. And I believe in silver more because it's the underdog nobody understands. It's the ugly duckling. But I think that from a long-term perspective, gold will always sustain, and that's why the number one rule of power is not he who holds a Bitcoin, right? He who holds the gold makes the rules, right? He might make those rules using Bitcoin or blockchain as the transfer mechanism of that wealth, but he'll make the rules, right? And I think it's important to understand that constant that history has given and why central banks today are buying it. They understand the power that it holds, especially when we're losing trust in the currencies that are backed by nothing by the politicians that are backing it, right? So think about Canada for a second. We have no gold. All we have is a lot of promises by these politicians that they're going to pay us back, but how are they going to pay us back? Our pension plans don't have any. Well, they're sitting on US dollars that are quickly losing trust among the world because the system is based on trust. That's it. Trust on what? The political party? Well, you have two now back in the US dollar. You had the Democrats and the Republicans. What are the choices, right? I don't know. I might like one versus the other, but it doesn't really matter. No, that's why gold always comes to the fore, right? And that's why this 50-year temporary period, I think, is coming to an end.
Well, we have nothing but trust.
Promises.
Trust, yeah. That's a better way to put it. We have promises wrapped in counterparty risk.
We have promises. No, hold on. This is what we have. We have promises that outlive the lives of the politicians that made those promises. And I think that's important because at the rate we're going, those promises are going to be paid back by their great-grandchildren who aren't even born yet. So can I trust that my great-grandchildren are going to be paid back from the promises that these politicians? No. And it's important because here's where the parallel to the 30 really comes for. Because in the 1980s, we had an inflationary recession led by monetary issues, but we had political cohesion. In the 1930s, we had again a monetary storm, but we also had the loss of trust of governments. So we ended up with a depression, not just a recession like the 30s, because of the political void that was created, right? And I think that's why, to me, today, when I look at what's happening with governments and I look back at history, I'm like, great, I'm very happy to be positioned because that means that the lift I'm going to get is going to be even better because we have way more debt and the same governments or the same implosion of governments happening on a global basis.
Well, go ahead.
Which is going to be even more transformative as we rebuild everything because we got to start from scratch.
So is it because much of the world is based around the US dollar, and as a consequence of that IOU, that promise, losing so much ground so fast, or so much faith so fast, is that a big part of that catalyst of that monetary reset?
No, I don't see it that way. What you're saying is it because the US dollar is losing trust? The US dollar itself isn't losing trust as fast as all the other currencies. I see it differently. I see the whole monetary system as the Titanic with the US dollar, the first deck. Okay? But that first deck...
That's still where the band is playing.
It is playing, but it's already on the water.
Yeah.
Once gold broke in US dollars above 2,000, the deck's still playing on the first deck, but it's going down, and that's why 2,800 now, 3,000. You know, as we get it, it's heading down. But the whole ship, the whole fiat ship, is going down, and so we have to rebuild the ship, and the rebuilding of the ship is being put together, and that has gold. That's why central banks are building it. That ship is golden, right, and it's still floating at the surface. And we're stuck somewhere in the middle, but the rebuilding will happen with gold in the middle. That's undeniable because even Bitcoin, it's a new technology. Hasn't been implemented around the world, but gold's still in central banks all over the world, right? So it might be the medium by which we transact it, which is definitely clear with Enbridge and the developments that are happening among countries. But the peg is gold because it's the only thing that governments, we're not talking about you and I, we're talking about China and Russia and India and the US and Chile, the governments. The one thing they can trust among themselves is who's got the gold and can you pay me in that? Can you transact in that? Right? And that's what's important. That hasn't changed. They don't care about Bitcoin.
That becomes the trustless asset or the
peg.
Yeah.
The peg they can all trust. Right? And that's the important thing, that the last peg was the US dollar backed by gold. Nixon unpegs that and starts on this journey that we've been for the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. But go back to 1776 when the French we start with gold. John Locke and Isaac Newton set the gold peg at 7. Then that gold peg transferred to the Americans, 1933. Then Nixon unwinds it. Now who does that ball transfer to? I think it's going to be a shared power, definitely China, with the US second, and then whoever comes in third after. But again, that is the peg by which they're going to reset this whole system. And I think this time, instead of using a centralized ledger, we're going to use a decentralized ledger that doesn't have to be managed by anybody. But with the peg of gold, we can definitely confirm that the trade settlements have a peg that they can all trust. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, that part of the puzzle to me is clear. And Enbridge is already running.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny because last week I was having this discussion on Twitter, and then I posted one reply that I posted why Enbridge would be a beautiful tool for anybody with 8,000 tons to reset the monetary system. Mm-hmm. Then I posted just that same thing on Grok, and it gave me a full essay on why I was right. Right? So AI understands what I'm talking about. And this thing's built, ready to go, and the gold is there.
So as a wealth manager and somebody that, pays attention to this stuff every day, what advice do you have to people that are, say, managing some of their own money and have felt this FOMO of not wanting to get or not wanting to miss out on these gains of, let's say, the NASDAQ or Bitcoin or some of these other cryptocurrencies? What is the key to building wealth over time and taking that longer term perspective?
Asset allocation. Having a strategic asset allocation in the different asset classes, mm-hmm. and take a disciplined approach, right? To rebalance that asset allocation.
So give us an example. You and I have talked before about the idea of rebalancing almost in a way like a currency pair, let's say gold to Bitcoin. When, let's say, Bitcoin hits what you feel like is a local high, you sell some of that and you rebalance and buy more gold.
Well, that's only because you're something goes up and the other one, or relatively something stays here. Mm-hmm. You just rebalance. So
if they're perfectly inversely correlated, that works excellent.
Exactly, but sometimes it doesn't. It's just even within the portfolio. Agnico has continued to outperform, so I just rebalance and then buy more of the one that hasn't yet taken off. Mm-hmm. That process right there of just rebalancing deals with your fear and greed, which is the 80% motivator of people that, this thing's going up, I'm going to let it ride, mm-hmm. right? Instead of just rebalancing all the time, right? That's what takes away the fear and greed motivation, just the rebalancing component.
But being deliberate about having a system like that is extremely important.
Of course it is, mm-hmm. but that's the problem. Is that, in my opinion, that's what's missing because people are chasing returns. Mm-hmm. They're not chasing rationality, right? But that creates opportunities because look at what's happening with the miner sector. Nobody owns it, mm-hmm. right? And to me, that's an opportunity because eventually they're going to have to own it, because the one constant of history is that as we go through these periods, gold and silver take off because it's not that they're taking off; it's the other ones are going down. But the profitability of the companies takes off even more. Mm-hmm. So throughout history, we're starting to see it. The free cash flow margins of the sector, it's compelling how much money they're making as everything's losing purchasing power, that even institutions are going to be forced to buy it, right? But right now it's zero. Like one of all global wealth, only 1% of all Western global money, only 1% allocation sitting in the sector. That's mm-hmm. pumping out massive cash flow, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they sit. Well, that's an opportunity because I'm that 1% that's been adding to that sector. But guess what? It's going to be like a tsunami coming into a shot glass when that money begins to reverse. Think about the Canadian pension plans. They don't have any. There's very little participation in the mining sector, never mind the gold and silver sector. What's going to happen to the purchasing power of that money that they have to give Canadians along the way? How are they going to keep up to the cost of living? Gold now is at $4,000 Canadian. It would used to be at par a couple of years ago, right? So that's telling us that something's going on, but pension plans are not adjusting yet, right? Now, eventually, I think they're going to have to adjust because greed and fear always offset each other. And it's going to be the FOMO of not having it, right? But we're going to go back to going from zero to an over-allocation. Through these periods, historically, it's been above 20%. Right now, it's 1%. Like that's a pretty good trade as far as I'm concerned.
And I think that also de-risks a lot of that entry point as well, is because you're recognizing how undervalued this sector is, and that takes a lot of the possible risk out of it. It's just a waiting game at that point.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because a lot of people, most of my clients now see it because we're starting to start the lift, but it's been a sideways movement. That sideways movement has been actually a pretty good signal because gold has held and then all of a sudden started going up, but the trajectory of the miners was sideways. So at least rationally you can start to see the picture, right? It was and that only started happening March of last year, but between 2021 to 2020, that was faith of just as we're going through the sideways movement. The benefit, though, by doing the asset allocation rebalancing is the fact that, I have some companies that we started at a $4 cost with 1,000 shares. Now we have a 40-cent cost base with exponentially more shares, thanks to that process. Anybody that's chasing returns, all they did was run away. So they have zero. The problem is that, in my opinion, as we go through these type of storms, which is exactly what happened in Latin America, you're going to need at least a 15% allocation. You have $1 million account. Name me one advisor that's going to buy you $150,000 worth of gold mining or silver mining companies. They're going to say, no, I'll buy you 10,000, right? So it'll take somebody with really good gumption to set that up for somebody. And I have my portfolios at 30% is the minimum in my equity income portfolio, right? 30% is the minimum that I have people at. So on $1 million, that's $300,000, right? Yeah, and I think that's going to be the challenge when people finally begin to get it, is how much can they buy as quickly as possible? Because you're going to have two components. As that reality starts to cease among people, prices are going to start to take off rather quickly. So it's going to get expensive very fast. That's why you have to be ready. You have to have your positions in place.
Which kind of comes back to that FOMO idea and being ready to ride that wave, right? Once, being ready to ride the wave before it really tips over.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? It's funny because I think that's what's important. But again, am I questioning? Yeah, I've questioned every time over the last 3 years what I was doing. But gold never broke, right? So having been in the business for 30 years also helped in terms of assessing cycles, right? Knowing full well that the longer something takes, the better the force behind it on the way back up, which is kind of something that Scott Bessent said in the one interview that I came across him before he couldn't do any more interviews.
The incoming Treasury Secretary for the U.S.
Correct, yeah. Correct. Where he's talking about Jimmy Rogers, and because he was trained by Jimmy Rogers, Soros, Druckenmiller, right? So the process by which they invest is very similar to what I've done, right? To have the gumption to stick it out, but add through that period so that we have a greater concentration in the one sector that needs to return to equilibrium, right? Now, is this going to happen? I think it's for sure, listening to what he's saying. His biggest position was gold, and he's talking about the return to equilibrium of things. That's the driver. So I personally think that if you pull that back, what he's saying, and it's because it's the credit imbalance between China and the U.S. that's going to be the motivator. Exactly what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So when you peel that back, and he's 40% invested in physical gold. Well, gold, to go back to do what it has done throughout history, it needs to be much greater than 2,800. Well, if that's the case, silver has to also move to return to equilibrium. But the biggest winner is going to be the producers whose earnings are going to be driven by that move in that return to equilibrium. And that's where I'm shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the surfboards. The wave is gold and silver moving forward. Yeah.
So, Jaime, I want to talk a little bit about incentives that you mentioned.
Okay.
This idea that these promises have been kicked down the road to the politicians' grandchildren, basically, to be able to pay off. How do you think we got to this place where the incentives for the politicians to promise tomorrow to be paid off by, future generations, how has that led us to this system that is seemingly so extremely broken?
What did Jesus say about money? He said that the biggest sin wasn't the love of money when he went into the bankers. The biggest sin wasn't money itself, but the love of money. Right? I think what we have here is a complete social pendulum of an inability to, look at the how societies always shift in their social attitudes, where we got to this level of flaunt it, versus the attitudes of the 30s, where if you were wealthy, you had philanthropy, you helped, but you hid your wealth because everybody was starving. So you go through these pendulums, and I think we're just suffering from that part of the pendulum where it was about how much can you make, how much without really assessing the consequences of what we're doing, be it from an environmental perspective, be it from a social perspective. Right. And I think that at the core of it is the fact that we were driven by emotions versus our values. Right. And that's where I think the individual has to stand in terms of what's driving your values. Right. What is important to you. Right. And again, to the guys that I met in the sailing, the guys that were doing it for what they enjoy doing versus the guys that are just doing it for the money. I find that today the drive just for the money, to make a quick buck, a quick return, is creating traders versus investors. Now, that creates an opportunity for true investors that understand buy cheap and just add and wait versus, how am I going to make a quick buck this week so I can go and party on Thursday night, right? Big difference, right? And I think it's the value set of people that tends to get corrupted, and then economic reality brings it back and slapped you in the face all of a sudden. And that just happens, right? It's a social pain that goes with that also adjusts society, and we're kind of seeing that social pain all over the world, because the problem with these periods of time is that it allocates greater and greater wealth on that 1% of a smaller and smaller portion of the society, until the masses say, I want to have some cake. Right. So those parallels always repeat. Yeah.
So, Jaime, as I see it, the three pillars of this show that I really want to focus on are health, wealth, and wisdom. So obviously, we haven't really touched on health. What do you think is the biggest keys to you keeping healthy? Because I know, you work out, you sail, you do all of these different things. So what are some of the keys that you think feed your health?
Spending time in the outdoors. That's one thing I appreciate about Canada. The expansiveness that we have, right? Just get out, enjoy there's a sketch from an old friend here in that says, may we always revel in the natural environment. That's so important, right? Nature is huge. I'm not a religious man, but I'm definitely spiritual. I love the morning sun. I love the stars. I love the nature, that the chance of having been. My best insult my father ever gave me was call me an ungrateful sperm, the one out of a billion that made him, and I treat him that way. Well, I think we're lucky. I was that lucky sperm that made it out and was able to live this amazing life, and we have to enjoy it, right? And being in nature is also the time where you can meditate, come back at refocus on who you are instead of all the noise of what's going on around us, especially with the stress of the last couple of years in terms of managing through this period. Regular workouts on that, healthy life, a good relationship, right? That's also important. Your friends, the people that, it's always when things are at their worst that you know who your friends are, right? And so it's important to go through the ups and the downs in life, because that's where the glue that really lasts through life, right? And the people you help along the way without, really thinking about it, it's what is right. On the health side, yoga, meditation, breathing, those are things that I think about as much as I do like a good party once in a while, right? That's
so you're saying that life's about balance.
It is a balance. It is a balance, right? I've never been the one that's gonna, cycle through Canada, but I tend to keep healthy to be able to enjoy the outdoors, and that's important, right? We as Canadians, as humans in this beautiful blue marble, all you got to do is get out and go for a walk at the very least. Breathe the air, enjoy the life that we have. Yeah. So health is important. Eating well, being careful what you eat. I can't understand Donald Trump, man, eating all those burgers. I would explode. But it works for his constitution, right? But having good access to food, to water, to vegetables, how you eat, all important things that you got to think about. Yeah. And health is an important issue. I need more of it, but it's been a stressful 3 years, and I think things are about to get better. But it's also, I think, about to get worse for society, because we're about to go through the trough, right? And I've seen that before in Latin America. I've seen that part. I've experienced it, and I think that in that environment, meditation and health are going to be very important for those that want to survive and disassociate, right? Think more about the people around you. One of the benefits of those periods, though, is it also brings back socially, one of the things we were talking about just a couple of minutes ago, how our attitudes have become very selfish. That social pain also brings back the community, brings back your family living, and it's already happening. Think about all the young kids that are graduating that can't move out of the house because they can't afford it. So they're going back to live with their parents. So that process is happening, right? So, but that also changes social attitudes again, right? And it cleanses society. But in that environment, you're stuck there. Well, you're going to want to go for a walk and enjoy what comes next, and also help your parents and your family and everything rebuilt, right?
So do you think, in a way, that pendulum of disconnection that social media and our ability to constantly be entertained by our phones, do you think that ends up swinging back to becoming more connected again as a society, or as to the relationships that you have in your life?
No, I think it's naive to think that the phone's going to disappear. I think the phone's going to be intricate within our reach to or our understanding to the world and family. I saw that in my youngest son. He was playing a game, but he's on the headset. And it's like, who the hell are you talking to? He's there with his 20 buddies at their homes in the middle of winter playing a game, communicating. Things that we would do on the street. It's just a different way of communication, but it's happening, right? No, I think that's just one of the tools that will always be with us, like the car, right? What is, though, is that the ability to know everything that's happening is happening quicker. So our ability to adapt is also accelerating. And the ability to change, I think, is also going to accelerate much quicker, right? I love the format today in that my views can easily get passed on to 1,000 people. What I think is more important is that the big change that has happened is that now people are asking for answers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're starting on their journey of discovery instead of that journey, that position of being completely not what's the word, ambivalence. Now they're like, oh, wait a minute, something's happening. I got to start thinking. That is the key when people finally start thinking, because that's the process of change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The best analogy I can say for that is this: is that you're sitting at a theater and you start to smell smoke.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have to get up before you have a rush? It's usually about 7%. I think we're through that threshold, and people now have started to think about things.
As Malcolm Gladwell calls that, that's the tipping point.
Yes, the tipping point. Correct. I think we're there already, and that's healthy because that's how social transformation occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So through your life, Jaime, what would you say are some of the keys to having successful relationships? Back to this idea of success. What are some of the...
Being honest. Being honest in who you are and presenting yourself as you truly are. Don't bullshit people. Don't, just... I've always been honest with my opinions, who I am, what I can do, right? And I haven't diverted. I presented my views I think that's the key, to just be yourself. But first, understand who you are. That's the key. That each person should first figure out, who are they? What do they want? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, getting there takes time, but getting there helps that you're swimming in that river and looking at it. So I'm convinced. I always say to younger people, life is throwing you signals. You got to be listening, right? And I think, and that's part of that, getting to know yourself and who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the important part. Yeah, being honest and starting with yourself and then with the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody doesn't like you because of who you are, it doesn't matter. They're not going to like you anyways. But it turns out that, the ones that stick around are well worth it because you like them as well. You have a rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do you think you stay open to being able to listen to some of life's signals?
Just experience. Yeah. Read, look, listen. That's the most important one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I have a problem with, according to my wife, but she's just a very patient woman. Yeah, I think that's what you have to do, and be open to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Be open to even the kid with the tattoos. You might learn something from them,
mm-hmm.
right? So then that's never been my. I've always enjoyed everybody. I've never had a problem with anybody that I found interesting in terms of something to chat about, right? Yeah. Treat everybody the way you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. If you want to be slapped around the face, well, that's another story, but you got a problem. But, be honest with people. Yeah.
I know for myself, something that I've been trying to be a little bit more deliberate about is to go into every interaction with more of an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience recently where a security guard started driving towards me in a campground. And I thought, oh, great. I just had this negative view. Here's some, person of authority that's going to tell me that I can't be doing X, Y, or Z because in the book, the rule says so, even though I'm not bothering anybody out where I am. And the guy came over just to ask me about a particular workout that he saw I was doing. And he just wanted to talk. And he could not have been nicer.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, you can be such an asshole in your mind and have this very bristly way of starting to deal with an interaction instead of just being open to that interaction. And on one regard, it was very humbling. And on the other point, it was extremely important for me to, it was an important lesson for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the next time that happened, where somebody just approached me randomly and I thought, oh, here we go. That was my initial instinct. Instead, I kind of flipped it and thought, oh, what possible gem is this person going to, come at me with? And just changing my mindset around how to have that interaction or how to start that interaction was completely transformational for the next time that I had an interaction.
So in essence, is the bottle half full or half empty? It's always the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you approach it with being half empty, it's going to be half empty. But if you approach it with it's probably half full, let's give it a shot. It turns out that you're going to learn something
Mm-hmm.
and fill it a little bit more instead of emptying it a little bit more. It's the life attitude, I think. Yeah.
And I think part of that too is to be aware enough or to be mindful enough to think, watch how you're going into this situation and learn from the last time, right? And I think
and that changes with experience over time, right? As you get older and you make it in age, right? Looking back, you realize, because I was an idiot along the way. Oh, I wish I would have done that differently. Well, at least have the forethought that you did make that, and next time approach it differently, right? And forethought of action. I think it's important that for younger people to understand, well, why am I doing the things I'm doing, right? So that next time you get somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
to be able to learn those lessons
exactly
and move forward instead of staying in that same.
Yeah, everybody has something to add, right? You just have to find it if you want to, right? Even the worst of people, be it a bad experience, maybe you can learn something from the bad experience, right? But be open to the interaction, but also be open to walk away and realize, what this is, right? I've traveled a lot and I've never felt scared. I've always traveled prepared, like don't flaunt it, don't have a fancy watch, but travel with a smile, right? I think that's important always to be open to the experience, because people want to. I think for the most part, I think people are good. People are good because they love their children, and at the core of any individual is that beauty, right? If I'm wrong, it's because we're looking at 7% maybe of the population that doesn't fit into that mold, but maybe I'll run into one of those 7%. But I know that the other 93% are good people. And so everywhere, I think, and that's the beauty of Toronto. Nobody's from here. Everybody comes from somewhere else. And you see it. People are good at heart. And that is extremely positive for the future as we go through whatever the hell we're going to go through.
What role do you think travel has played in informing
Massive.
how you see the world?
Massive. To understand that people think differently is great, but at the core, things are good, right? I think travel, and that's again one of the beautiful things about Toronto, that everybody came from somewhere else. But if you go to those places, even the good smells, the bad smells, everything. I love the experience of travel. Which is one of the things that my wife, before we met, she had traveled all over the world on her own. We share that, and that I appreciate about her. And it builds on your character in that you realize that, hey, this world's way bigger than me. There's a lot of people out there, and they all have something to tell, all have something to add. And that's important, because once you realize that this world is not about you, selfish ego, but about everybody, everything will change. And that is what the internet has done for us, made us smaller in terms of our ability. Look how quickly we find out everything that's happening, right? So the pain,
which can also be a bad thing.
It can be a bad thing, but it's also a transformative thing that at the end I think is positive, because I share the pain, and a lot of the pain that's going on around the world. I'm seeing it, and I realize, man, there's a level of value here that doesn't match my values, right? And this needs to be resolved. So I might not be in a position to be able to stand up, but I definitely um, behind closed doors, non-public doors, I stand up for what I think is wrong, right? And there is a lot of wrong, but it doesn't come out until you see it, and we are seeing it. So that's the positive of it.
Do you think that consistency from private life to public-facing life, you face a lot of your clients and stuff, that consistency from behind closed doors to in front of, let's just call it the public, is extremely important to have as a piece of your character?
Well, it's pegged under my value set, right? So yeah, behind closed doors, I tend to swear a bit too much, which my wife hates, and that's the one part of moderation. But for the most part, I'm always honest in terms of what I say to people. I speak my mind. That's what I get paid for, my opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been. I've never been shy about expressing, and even when I see something bad, right? I'll go up and say to somebody. It's funny. There's a lot of funny story up in Collingwood. There's all kinds of migrant workers from Latin America, and I see how people mistreat people, right? So, and I have an old '85 pickup truck. So, summertime, I'm tan and I look like them, and it's like I've had it coming my way, and I start speaking Spanish, right? Or I help them out. But, it's like, hey, what's going on, man? But I'll stand up, right? I call people on it. I don't have a problem with that, right? Because to me, it's wrong, right? But also, by doing it, that person that's doing it, all of a sudden something hopefully had clicked, right? So I see it as something good. Mm-hmm. But it's part of here's a guy that's here working, doing a job that we don't want to do, so he can help his family over there. That's something good. Don't, help that person out. They're always hitchhiking. I'll pick him up and give him a ride. I don't have a problem with that, right? But it's because I see myself as part of humanity, and if I can help, I will help. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Maybe they're scared to function that way, but I think as we go through social pain, also our ability to say, no, I got to do something also sparks up. And that's how social change always happens, right? It for the better. Yeah.
One of the things that I think travel has taught me through the years is gratitude. Last year I went to Africa, for example, or I went to Argentina recently. And you see how the rest of the world lives. And it makes you being pissed off that your phone isn't working or...
It's not important.
Exactly. It gives you a completely different perspective of things could be so much worse, right?
Yeah, but you know what? To them, some of them are the level... I find that, things could be much more economically, but within the scope of their reality, they try to make the best of it, right? Now, can it be better? Yeah, sure. And is it going to get better? I hope so. Again, we got to start with our community. We got to start with each individual in our access that we can help. And that's what I'm trying to do. Help as many people as possible that I can with what I know in terms of my knowledge, my skill set over the years. Yeah.
So Jaime, as part of being, somebody with fairly diverse interests and that has worked in many different disciplines that are seemingly unrelated, what are some skill sets or frameworks of how you learn things that you think are extremely important and have really served you through your life?
That's a wrong question for me because I tend to get right involved in it even if I mess it up and then have to fix it, right? So
maybe that's a way of doing it.
That has been my approach. It's usually led to some of the pains in my body, but it has always been, okay, let's try that and just go for it, right? Instead of starting at the beginning. I think what's more important is the curiosity to try something new. So it goes back to curiosity, right? And having the curiosity to ask the other people on, hey, how did you get there? Yeah.
Mhm.
That I think is at the core of that question. Yeah. To be able to try new things. Now, again, when I would love to try that what do you call it? Those foil now that they have, on the surfboard. But I'm getting older, and you gotta balance that with age, so
Mhm.
you adapt as well as you get older. But if I was younger, man, I would be trying that stuff,
Mhm.
right? So whatever I can try as I was younger, I always did and gave it a try. Which I also try to encourage on my kids. I always said, okay, you gotta do activities, even
Mhm.
if you don't like it, you gotta try it for a year. But after that, we change, and some things stuck, right? Skiing and sailing, luckily, stuck for both my kids, and they
Mhm.
both love it, right? But to be able to enjoy the activities is what's amazing. Soccer, whatever, right? Just to get out, because it also engages you in the with other humans, which is important, right? To help you build your character.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So once this, let's say this wealth transfer or this um, end of the credit cycle presents itself, what is the sailing trip that you're looking forward to?
Oh, I'm doing those. I'm doing those. But yeah, no, that's a good question. I love Italy. I want to do the trip that the guy in Ripley was doing, which was he was going along the coast of Italy on a boat, and then he would dock it and then go into Italy. I think that would be pretty cool. Live in Europe for a year, spend a year in Italy would be definitely be on my bucket list. But first, I got to take my wife to Morocco. No, that's pending. We were supposed to go pre-COVID, and we still haven't done it. Yeah, no, there'll be a lot of travel. But again, you know what I think? What's nice is that I had this thought years ago that I would like to work to be able to travel to places and be away for an extended period of time. But I've discovered so last year, my Alexander was studying in Paris, so we went to Paris and Barcelona. We spent 3 weeks there. We spent 2 weeks in Croatia. We did a sailing trip in Croatia, which was great. So last year, I was away about 6 weeks. But thanks to the telecommunications, that's happening. So I find that in today's world, I don't have to be anywhere.
Mhm.
Now, how long do I continue to do this? Who knows? It's a career that has no timeline because it's all up here.
Mhm.
So I'll continue to enjoy. I love my client base. I love my clients, the relationships. So I'm lucky in that it's something that I can do for a long time. But I also have the ability to be able to do it not in one place. So the ability to see the world and experience it,
Mhm.
right? I still have to make it to the bottom of the world. I want to take my kids to Torres del Paine, which I've never visited. It was one of the few places that I saw all of Chile as a kid, but never made it there. And I want to make sure that I go there with my kids. That and Rapa Nui, Easter Island,
Mhm.
as part of our Chilean experience because they have a lot of family there.
Mhm.
So that's still there. And Asia. I've never been to Asia. So there's a lot to see still.
Mhm.
So hopefully, knock on wood, it'll happen.
Mhm.
And I think it will. We definitely will be doing a lot of travel going forward along the way and experiencing the world.
Mhm.
The Yukon, I still have to do the northern Canada, which is something that we talk about my wife. But Canada start here. It's such an amazing country.
Mhm.
So much to see. Quebec City, Newfoundland. It's amazing. The Maritimes. Yeah, it's just an amazing place. So I would urge anybody to start with your own country and your own,
Be curious.
be curious. Correct.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Jaime, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I
Thank
look
you.
forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, definitely.